Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and welcome to the third in this special series of shows that we're publishing all week here on the Art of Procurement. So if you haven't heard already, we're having 5 different shows that are published all of this week with thought leaders from the procurement space. And the interviews are part of what we're calling the Big Idea Week. And it's part of Procurious Big Idea Summit, with each of the guests being a keynote speaker at the upcoming event, which is in London on April 21st. But there's also a way that you can participate online. I'll share with you how you can do that in the show notes and at the end of the show today. So I'm targeting each interview to be a little bit shorter than the typical Art of Procurement show, but I have to admit that I'm finding that pretty difficult to keep the conversation short when I have so many questions to ask. And that was particularly the case with my guest today. I just finished speaking with Chris Sawchuk, and Chris is the Principal and Global Procurement Advisory Practice Leader at the Hackett Group. And I've followed the work of Chris and the Hackett Group for some time, really across all of my procurement career. So I was really excited to get the opportunity to talk to him today. In our discussion, you're going to hear Chris discuss the findings of Hackett Group's Key CPO Issues Study, and he's going to share what's the top of hearts and minds of procurement leaders right now. And then we're going to specifically talk about the biggest capability gaps that CPOs have. And they were determined as part of a research effort, and it's something I love this. So there's a graph that I'm going to share with you in the show notes. But basically, Hackett looked at all the different priorities of CPOs right now, and they mapped them against the current capabilities that CPOs have in terms of being able to execute against those priorities. In doing so, they were able to identify 4 different areas that are of high importance in terms of capability, but that CPOs just don't have the ability to execute, so they're high development areas. So we're going to talk about what a couple of those are in the show. And for someone like me, this is really fascinating stuff. So I hope that you're going to enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Before we do go into the show, I wanted to let you know that if you find value in the content that we share here at the Art of Procurement, then I'd love it if you could sign up to be notified every time that a new episode is published. All you need to do is head on over to artofprocurement.com/subscribe and pop in your email address, and then I'll send you an email every time we go live with a new show. Also, with our new website now being live, there's a couple of areas on the site that you can use, a couple of boxes that will pop up or they're in a header bar. Just do the same, pop your email address in there, it goes to the same place. We'll make sure that we send you an email every time a show is published. Well, with that being said, enough from me. Let's head on straight into the interview with Chris. Well, hi everybody, and I'm excited to welcome Chris Sawchuk today. Chris is the Principal and Global Procurement Advisory Practice Leader at the Hackett Group. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Phil. I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, and I shared some of your background with listeners as part of my introduction to the show. And so I just wanted to start with the first question. It's something that I ask most of my guests. And that is, how did you get into procurement? Is it something that chose you, or did you choose it?
Yeah, it wasn't a grand design.
Right.
I would tell you, in going back a little bit in my career, when I was in college, my father was in procurement for IBM. And like some PI said when I came out of college, there's 2 things I was not going to do. One was I was not going to work for IBM.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with an IBMer. And secondly, I was not going to do anything that had to do with supply management or procurement.
Right.
That's what my dad did. So, and where I am today, the first rule that I broke when I came out of college is that I was an electrical engineer. And so when I came out, I actually started working for United Technologies as a design engineer. But one of the things that I found out when I got out of school, that IBM was at the time was one of the most admired organizations in the world to work for, especially for electrical engineers. And so I said, you know what, you want to go work for them. And so I ended up working for IBM about a year after school, and in one of their development labs, working on some of the large servers, the mainframe systems. The second rule that I broke was going into procurement. And again, when I was at IBM, I actually spent some time not only in engineering, but I also got into the sales and marketing area within the business as well. And as I was doing that, I had some opportunities to lead the company and do other things, et cetera. And I also had an opportunity to go work for this consulting firm. And as I went there, it was management consulting. It was focused on strategic sourcing. And so that was the second rule that I broke. But I actually got into procurement, through professional services. And as I got into it, that's when I started, really not only learning about strategic sourcing, but at the same time, started doing a lot of work on the side, with organizations and doing some research, et cetera, and actually co-authored some books.
Mm-hmm. So you, I guess it shows that you never say never to anything.
No, not at all. I look at, what I thought I was going to do years and years ago.
Right.
And sometimes I tell people I'm still trying to figure out what I want to go do.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think you'd be the only person. That's for sure. And I feel that most of us fall into the profession in some way, shape or form. And, we just get the bug and we stay with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we go into the subject of agility, which is something that I know we're going to talk about, I'd just love to pick your brain on a couple of findings from the 2016 Key Issues Study that you published at Hackett. And first of all, and maybe this is more from a broader sense, what are some of the key challenges that you see in front or that are at the front of mind for CPOs this year in 2016?
Yeah, one of the things that we ask every year in our study is, and again, we've been running this study for about 10 years, and we always do it at the tail end of the year. So, when we did the study for 2016, we actually did that at the tail end of 2015. So it's always, asking people at the tail end of the year, what do you see happening? What do you see as your highest priorities as you look into the next year? And, what was interesting is, maybe not interesting, and sometimes people will say it's a big yawn, but, the number one area of focus this year is the focus on spend cost reduction and avoidances within the organization. Now, I say that because the last 2 years, it was not the number one area of priority and focus for the procurement organization. And it is a very global study, very balanced between North America, EMEA, and the rest of the parts of the world as where we're getting these insights from many different industries. Now, when I'm telling you this, this is actually looking at it on a global basis. If we were to look in any specific region around the world, we may see different insights and different priorities, say, in the EMEA region versus, say, North America or even the Pacific. But what I'm providing is some insights from a global basis. But the thing is, as you look at this, and if you go back 2 years ago when, spend cost savings was number one, and when we actually started the study, more than 10 years ago, every year, it was almost like a big yawn. Every year, people say, well, what's your number one priority? Saving money.
Right.
And it was just sort of this repetitive type of, priorities. And that wasn't all the way until we hit, 2014. And as we went into 2014, our priorities shifted a little bit. And one of the things that we were dealing with as organizations was the fact that the savings that we were delivering that were, I'll say, amplified a bit due to the downturn in 2009 and 10, et cetera, we in procurement were able to deliver quite effectively in that kind of environment. There was a lot of focus on it, and our savings, because of the deflation in the marketplace, increased quite significantly. But what we have been seeing, and it only lasts for so long, and then what you started seeing is degradation in our ability to deliver savings back to organization. It became harder. And so one of the things that organizations are asking is, well, how do we continue that same rate of savings back to the organizations? Typically, organizations or the people that report to, their expectations aren't necessarily being ratcheted down, typically being ratcheted up. And so one of the things that we saw in 2014 was that the priority shifted to one of increasing our influence across the organization. Now, there's a close correlation between that and saving money. If we want to go, save more, and that's one of our priorities, we got to go find other ponds to fish in other than ones that we have been fishing in to see where are there other opportunities to deliver value back to the organization. And when you look at the average procurement organization out there, lots of opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and trying to do it in an environment where, you've got low-hanging fruit, you've taken care of kind of the easy wins, and now it's about bringing additional value out of more mature relationships, which you need influence to be able to kind of infiltrate the stakeholder group to even be listened to and to have a voice.
Right. And as you asked me, what were some of the other areas? I told you about the focus on spend cost reduction is number one, but right behind that is an interesting one. And it's actually focusing on being that trusted advisor to the business. And then as we further go down, you see things such as, increasing the influence on, the spend of the organization, what we saw as number one in 2014, but also the focus on improving our agility as an organization. These are priorities. Those two, the trusted advisor and the agility, wasn't something that we actually had on the list prior to 2015. It was something that was a result of a study that we did back in 2014, where we characterized 5 characteristics of world-class organizations. And then when we looked at them, not just from benchmarking data and quantitative information, but just looking at these companies that seemed to perform really well in terms of what they did in supply management, procurement, et cetera. What was different about them? What were some of those key characteristics? And two things that, 2 of the 5, one was around agility. The other was around being this trusted advisor to the business. And we saw that characteristic in these organizations. So what we did is, after, learning about that, and we had, wrote a paper on this, and it's actually published in a number of different, media sources. But we added those 2 things to the list of the priorities for executives in procurement to choose from as they think about their priorities and objectives. In the first year that we added those things to the list, which was last year, things like the trusted advisor as well as agility, last year the number one area was being that trusted advisor to the business. Right. How do we become that? And it was, quite interesting. A lot of folks say, well, that's, very soft, but, it's something that people think about. It's an enabler for the organization.
And what do you see that world-class procurement organizations do differently that allows them to become a trusted advisor? And what impact do you see that having then on their relationship with their business and the value that they can bring their business?
I think there's 2 things. I mean, in some ways, we were asking people in some of the roundtables that we would do, and we also, as a team, we would, sort of think about it, because when you think about this idea of being a trusted advisor, it's not something that you deem yourself. You can't just wake up someday and say, I'm going to be a trusted advisor. Right. No, it's something that your stakeholder determines and thinks of you. So, the question is, what do you do? And I even had organizations ask me to train them. Chris, can you come out and train us on being a trusted advisor? And I would scratch my head and think, well, how am I going to go do this? And so, one of the things that we really wanted to understand is maybe go out and ask people. So as part of our study, our key issue study this year for 2016, we asked that question. If trusted advisor is something that we see as a key characteristic and objective of our organizations, what does it mean? What do you got to do to make that happen? And one of the things that we saw, and by far the number one area, was delivering on the basics.
Interesting.
And if you think about that, it's one of those things where don't go doing all the fancy things for me. If you can't even do the simple things, deliver and create a habitual relationship that you're able to deliver with the organization. And that's really foundational. As I saw that, I saw, that the high percentage of organizations really seeing that as a key driver to attaining this, trusted advisor kind of, relationship with their business. It's delivering on the basics. But right behind that, what they characterize as well is having access to high quality talent.
Right.
And if you think about it, it is the interface with these individuals. And, first of all, I think what we were seeing is that you got to deliver. It's foundational. Build that relationship. And it's not something that you do once. It's something that you have to do repetitively over time to gain that trust. And then secondly is having the right kind of people, high quality individuals that are going to interface with these individuals. And so that was really the second thing that they highlighted. Now, there's a number of other things, but those two really stood out as key areas of I'll say critical success factors in actually becoming that trusted advisor.
So when you think about, and this is really the final question on this, just because of time, but when you think about delivering on the basics, it's making sure that you, and this is kind of, I guess, my perspective, and I'm interested in on your thoughts. You're looking at it that you've got to be aligned with them. So it's delivering on the basics, but basics that are important to them, not necessarily things that you think are important to you because you have a particular metric. So aligning yourself with the business before you can even deliver on what's important to them is fundamental, I think, in being able to do that.
Absolutely. I tell organizations all the time is, organizations say, well, what about spend savings? And, is that, should that, is the main objective. At the end of the day, you're only around to enable the success of the business.
Right.
Because the business, and whatever that takes, if saving money is something, and cost savings and, all the things that are wrapped around it is something that enables business, then it ought to be on your list of things that you're going to go focus on. But if it isn't, then it shouldn't be. And I don't care if 99.9% of the procurement organizations out there measure it. It shouldn't be something that you focus on, because at the end of the day, it got to be aligned. I get the question all the time, and people ask me, so, well, Chris, what metrics should we be using, in our organization? What are the ones we ought to have, and, that should be on our card, et cetera. And, I said, I don't know. And, I can tell you, commonly utilized metrics, et cetera, but I have a list of 10 areas or 10 guidelines that I use with organizations. I said, if you follow these guidelines, what you will come out with is is this set of measures that you ought to be using. And the first one on that list is alignment. You got to be aligned. If the business is focused on, margin and improving their margins and, cost, et cetera, then you ought to see it on the procurement scorecard. At the same time, you ought to see it on your supplier scorecard. So it's all got to be aligned. But if it isn't, it shouldn't be on there.
Right. No, and I talked to one organization on the show, actually. It was the head of strategic sourcing at Google. And Google, their team is about facilitating growth. And sure, cost management of cost is important because they don't want it to get out of control. But they want to make sure that they can enable their stakeholders to bring new ideas to market, not try and scrimp and save on every last cent just so they can save money.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one of the things that you see in organizations today is that there's a lot of things that the business is focused on. And the biggest challenge that procurement has is that they're all over the place. Right. I mean, depending on the business and how diversified your business is, you may have stakeholders that are focused more on cost. You get others that are focused more on growth, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And you as an entity have to serve all of those. And so the question is, how do you go about doing that? And I think this really becomes, some of the conversation I'm going to have at the Big Ideas event is the focus on agility. We have to be agile as an organization and be able to flex with the changes, not only internally, but externally within our environments. And so the question is, how do we do that?
Hopefully I don't get into trouble with my audience for saying this, but I think agility has probably not been one of our strongest points as a profession. And, I fear that with the pace of change being so fast around us, we're at risk of getting left behind if we don't move, because people are going to move past us if we stand still. So what are a couple of things that you advise clients to consider when they want to start thinking about being more agile with their procurement capabilities?
Well, I think that the first thing is that we all have elements of agility in the models that we build. We build models to deliver supply management, procurement, types of services to the business and to or even to our external customers. And so with that, as you think about that operating model that we've created, it's not always predictable out there. The only reason we have to worry about being agile is that we don't always can't predict what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
It's sort of like manufacturing. As you think about manufacturing, if you knew exactly what the demand in the marketplace is, then the most efficient way to build an environment, a manufacturing environment, is to build a line that just focuses on you know exactly what you need to go build, and you build a line and the production capabilities to build against that known demand.
Mm-hmm.
But we start thinking about things in manufacturing like flex capacity because we don't know exactly what the demand is going to be. So we flex to that, and we build some of this agility within our organizations. It's no different than procurement. I mean, we don't always know what's going to be happening out there, so we have to be able to, flex. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, to what degree do we want to build that agility and that flexibility within our organization? Because it's a cost, and there's a cost trade-off. I mean, building flex capacity in your manufacturing line isn't necessarily the most efficient and cost-effective way to do that, but it allows you to respond, to the changing demand within the marketplace itself, or unpredictable demand that's in the market that you have. But if everything was known, then you just build an environment that makes stuff for that known demand. But we don't know, and so we have to be flexible. And in some cases, we're in an environment in our company that has a lot of volatility in that, and as a result of that, we need to create some ability to flex with that environment, to be agile. And as we think about that, we have to think about different components of how we deliver our services back to the organization.
Right.
I mean, we got people doing that. Is there a way that we can, make our people infrastructure more agile? Are there ways to make our technology infrastructure more agile? Are there ways to make our processes more agile, et cetera? So I think we really have to evaluate it. And I think the thing is, every company out there has something they've done around making themselves more agile. I think what we haven't done is necessarily make it core or make it sort of systematic, that we have a framework to think through in terms of how do we build this within our environment. And it becomes more systematic, with how we build and, shape our environment as we look forward, because it's always going to be changing. And, I think the environment that we look going forward has certainly got a lot of unpredictable things in it. The disruptive technologies, the innovation, et cetera. I mean, you see companies going away much more quickly than we saw in the past.
Right.
You see new companies coming out. I mean, you mentioned Google, just now. I mean, here's a company that, came out of nowhere. Not nowhere. I mean, they've been around for a bit of time, but it's not, it's not 50 years, right? And I think they got the second largest market cap of any company out there. So these changes are happening much more dramatically and fast than what we have seen before. So we have to be much more agile to take advantage of opportunities, and at the same time to protect ourselves from things that aren't opportunities and risks.
So when you think of, you mentioned on delivery models, and that's something that is really interesting to me in terms of how we build agile organizations, because I think that the use of third parties, the use of procurement services firms, the use of procurement technology, on a more on-demand basis is critical to being able to build a more flexible delivery model. And I just wonder if that's something that you see when you talk to clients.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a number of different models out there that you can use third parties for. And I think as you look at your operating models, I think the options that procurement organizations have today are obviously much more numerous than what we experienced, 5-10 years ago, much more viable. And I think as an executive, you have to consider these various options as you think about how you deliver what you need to deliver to the organization to enable the business's success. How do I go do that? And, I'm not saying, and I'm not, saying one way or the other, but I think you have to consider all of the various options that are available to you today to build the most effective model and efficient model, for the organization. So you have to.
Well, we're coming up to time now, Chris, and I have a final question that I ask all of my guests, and I think that we talked beforehand. I'm not sure if I actually gave you this before we got on the phone, so hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot too much. But it's around, one thing. What's one thing that you think a procurement professional can do today just to increase the value that he or she provides to their stakeholder? What's a key takeaway that they can go and act on when they go and talk to their stakeholder today or tomorrow?
I think as they think about their stakeholders, I always tell organizations that you have conversations with stakeholders. And sometimes, we go out there and we talk about our procurement services, and sometimes we ask our stakeholders, what else can we do for you? And they might say, well, no, I think you're doing a lot of good stuff, and I can't think of anything else you can do for me. Or you might ask them, how well are we doing? They say, I think you're doing well. You're saving me some money, etc. And what we don't ask is the right question, and that is, what are you focused on?
Yeah.
And let them talk about themselves, and then go back and then figure out if that's what they're focusing on, what can we do as an organization to help them with those things? Mm-hmm. And in some cases, it may not be a capability that we have today. Maybe it's something that we're going to have to build or buy to help them with that. But if that's what's important to them, if that's what's going to make them successful, then we're going to have to figure it out. And so I think, I see in the future is really a model where we create services based on business needs. You can look at every day, look at the taxonomy. Okay, these are the typical things that procurement organizations do, and that's not going away. But at the same time, there's other things that our businesses need that we can potentially help them, through the supply lens to enable them to be more successful. And so, we got to ask those right questions. It's about what they're trying to accomplish and how we will enable it.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you were able to come up with an answer to that as I put you on the spot there. I think that's so important. And something that I hear, more and more is that it's less about what we think that our role is as a profession and more about what our business wants from us.
Right.
So, Chris, we've come up against time. So, first of all, thank you very much. I truly appreciate you making the time available today to talk and for connecting with me in advance of your presentation at the Big Idea Summit. Just as a reminder for our listeners, the summit is on April the 21st, and you can sign up to be a digital delegate at bigideasummit.com. And I'll also link to that link along with the Hackett Group's Key Issues Study report that we talked about earlier in the show notes from today's episode. And that's going to be at artofprocurement.com/bigidea2006, Big Idea 2016. And you'll see a link to all the shows as part of this week on that page. So, Chris, thank you very much once again.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.